The USA plans to update its nuclear arsenal, as many American missiles are now older than the technicians who maintain them. For the past few decades, terrorism and cyber attacks have traditionally been considered the main threats to American national security. During this time, strategic bombers, submarines, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, seen as relics of the Cold War era, have aged and fallen into disrepair. The expected service life of these once advanced weapons has ended, and by 2022, maintaining the outdated nuclear arsenal in a combat-ready state had become a costly and labor-intensive procedure. One of Joe Biden's main goals when he won the presidential election was to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in American policy. However, this idea lost relevance in 2021 after it was revealed that China was expanding its nuclear arsenal more aggressively and swiftly than expected. The idea of minimizing America's own armament seemed even more inappropriate to US authorities after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and explicit threats of a nuclear strike from Russian propagandists. Skeptics note that the decision to maintain the nuclear arsenal entails certain consequences. To ensure that the weapons can be used as intended, at least theoretically, they need to be updated. Currently, the US has planes, missiles, and submarines that are more suited to a standoff with the Soviet Union half a century ago than to modern conflicts with Russia and China. Another reason for expert consideration is the mere return of the topic of nuclear weapons to public discourse. If the USA does prioritize updating its nuclear arsenal, how will this process occur? How much money will need to be invested? And how long will it take? Former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel believes that authorities should either modernize the relevant military systems or completely abandon their use. He sees funding and producing new missiles as a more reasonable option than attempting to improve old land-based missiles. While the issue of modernizing armaments is still being debated in Congress, the military has to keep the existing ICBMs in a state of constant readiness. They are located in silos within a radius of about 160 kilometers from military bases, to which their maintenance specialists are assigned. Farmers living near these bases on the Great Plains have grown accustomed to convoys of trucks marked with the U.S. Air Force designation passing by their homes. The facilities housing the missiles appear to be unremarkable sections of prairie fenced with barbed wire. To access a silo, an Air Force maintenance team must open a lid that weighs nearly a ton using a screw jack, after which one of the team members enters two combinations on code locks. 2 stories underground, they find themselves in a round room lined with missiles along the walls, capable of hitting any point on the planet within half of an hour. In the black nose of each missile is a thermonuclear warhead with a charge 20 times more powerful than the bomb that killed at least 90,000 people in Hiroshima in August 1945. However, such thoughts concern the technicians arriving at the bunker less than their daily duties. They regularly replace parts, take the missiles for inspection, and reinstall them to ensure that the weapons, manufactured 52 years ago, work if an order is given. Every possible malfunction and algorithm is standardized and described in manuals as thick as holy scriptures. The technicians look like ordinary repair workers, and their job seems far less exotic and high-tech than one might imagine when thinking about the repair and installation of nuclear weapons. Most missile bunkers, like the one described by Time correspondents, were built back in the 1960s, and since then, neither the launch systems nor other equipment have been updated. Maintenance team members are used to regular power outages due to malfunctions in distribution panels, produced several decades before the current technicians were born. In such cases, they have to wait some time before the generator kicks in. The power will come back. You just have to wait a couple of seconds, explains team leader Tech Sergeant Brian Fasella. A lot of things here are very old. Once the roof leaked in a bunker housing thermonuclear warheads. Usually, repair workers do not fix complex issues related to the missiles and their fillings, but rather deal with routine problems like rust, misaligned doors, clogged pipes, and walls swollen from dampness. The condition of each missile depends on thousands of components, and something is always failing. The maintenance team at the bunker in Wyoming, accompanied by journalists, replaces average 5 parts a day. Sometimes a new part is found in military storage. Keeping the missiles and equipment in the silos operational costs the government $55,000 per hour. If the USA decides to maintain its current arsenal, the costs of keeping it combat ready will increase every year. Over the past 5 years, maintenance costs have risen by 17% and now amount to nearly $482 million annually. If the government abandons part of the missile arsenal, it could lead to a critical shift in the global strategic balance, which posits that if one state launches a nuclear attack on another, the subsequent exchange of strikes would threaten the existence of all humanity. Currently, the Pentagon is leaning towards a third option, spending at least $1 trillion over the coming decades to modernize the key elements of the nuclear triad: bombers, submarines, and missiles. $100 billion from this amount will be allocated to replace land-based missiles. The final decision on what to do with the American nuclear arsenal will be made by Congress. Given Biden's support, high-ranking Pentagon officials are confident their plan will be approved. In April of this year, representatives of the U.S. Air Force held the first of many meetings with residents of areas that could be affected by the upcoming military reform. The project, which is still in its early stages and will likely take several decades, promises to be one of the most complex and costly in history. Its implementation involves dismantling 450 missiles with silos and 45 control centers in Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, Montana, and North Dakota. Additionally, authorities will need to compensate nearly 10,000 landowners for the inconvenience before beginning the construction and installation of new equipment. The project will not only replace missiles, silos, and launch centers, but also the underground network of energized cables connecting these structures. Air Force leaders say the main goal of this project is to create a simpler and cheaper system for maintaining the missiles throughout their designated 50-year service life, rather than constantly spending time, resources, and money on repairing old missiles. In Wyoming, the nuclear arsenal reform is planned to begin by 2025, with major construction work on bunkers and command posts scheduled for 2026. From then on, project leaders promise to open one new silo each week for the next 9 years. Until then, maintenance teams will have to contend with outdated parts, power outages, and metal corroding dampness. The main argument of the reform supporters is that so far, the system of deterring nuclear threats through the possession of its own arsenal has worked without fails. The existing doctrine implies that Russia, China, or North Korea would not dare to launch a nuclear strike on the USA, knowing they would face inevitable consequences. Critics of this position call it outdated and argue that land-based missiles are no longer necessary. Long-range bombers and submarines are sufficient to demonstrate power and maintain parity. Recently, the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden updated the status of the country's deployed nuclear forces after Russia suspended the New START treaty on the reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. Currently, Washington has 1,419 warheads deployed on 662 land and submarine-based missiles, as well as heavy bombers. These numbers are within the limit of 1,550 warheads on 700 delivery systems established by the New START treaty. The United States continues to adhere to transparency between nuclear-armed states, which is extremely valuable for reducing the likelihood of misperception, miscalculation, and costly arms races. Such measures are especially important during periods of high tension, noted the U.S. State Department. Meanwhile, the Russian Federation has not provided corresponding information. The United States, like their opponents, follows the principle: if you want peace, prepare for war. And the U.S. is preparing, as the world stands on the brink of a third world war, which, if it happens, is likely to be the last war in human history. But let's hope that politicians can reach an agreement, common sense will prevail, and all nuclear arsenals will remain merely elements of deterrence, not tools of destruction.